It wasn't a missile, it wasn't a plane, and it made no sound when it struck. It was a gun so massive, so terrifying, and so secret that even the Allies weren't sure it was real. Until it almost was. Deep beneath a remote hillside in occupied northern France, Adolf Hitler was overseeing the construction of a weapon that could have changed the course of history. Not the V-1 flying bomb, not the V-2 rocket, but something far more sinister. The V-3 Supergun, a colossal artillery cannon built into the earth itself. Designed to rain fire on London without a single German soldier setting foot outside. It was the weapon no one saw coming. In late 1943, as the tides of war began to turn against Germany, Hitler grew obsessed with the idea of vengeance. He needed a miracle, something big enough, shocking enough, to break British morale and turn the war back in his favor. That's when Nazi engineers presented a monstrous concept, a Hochdruck pump, or high-pressure pump, the code name for a multi-chambered supercannon. It would use a series of side charges to accelerate a shell over 165 kilometers, straight into the heart of London. No launch site, no risk to pilots, no radar detection, just pure, silent destruction from below the earth. To house this nightmare weapon, the Nazis chose a secret site called Mimoyecques, carved into the hills of Pas-de-Calais, France. It was a perfect location, elevated, isolated, and directly facing London. Hundreds of forced laborers were sent to dig out the tunnels, working in horrific conditions. The V-3 would be embedded deep within the hill, shielded by reinforced concrete, hidden from bombers, but the weapon itself was madness. At 140 feet long per barrel, each V-3 cannon would fire a 3-meter shell, traveling at over 1,500 meters per second. Imagine an underground machine, so powerful, so massive, it could flatten city blocks from 100 miles away, without warning. Hitler's scientists planned to install 25 barrels, firing up to 600 shells per hour into London. No planes, no movement, just destruction. The Allied response. Confusion. At first, British intelligence believed the site was for storage or perhaps a bunker, but whispers of a supergun began to surface. Reconnaissance photos showed something unnatural: long tunnels, steel rails, explosive chambers. When the reality of the weapon began to take shape, the Allies realized, if Hitler succeeds, London could fall in days. The panic was real. Churchill himself was briefed. An Operation Crossbow, a top-secret Allied mission, was launched to find and destroy Germany's V-weapons before they were ever fired. But time was running out. As the Mimoyecques site neared completion in early 1944, construction accelerated. Supplies poured in, troops surrounded the area, and Hitler was growing impatient. He demanded results. He wanted to see the shell hit London even once. And here's the terrifying part. The V-3 almost fired in June 1944. As the Allies prepared for D-Day, Hitler's supergun was just weeks away from operational testing. The British government ordered emergency evacuations from areas of London. People whispered of a new German death beam, but what they didn't know was that salvation would come not from a spy, but from the sky. Just days before the V-3 could be tested, Allied bombers were dispatched to strike Mimoyecques, but conventional bombs weren't enough. The supergun was buried under meters of solid rock. That's when the Allies unleashed the most secretive and powerful weapon in their aerial arsenal, the Tallboy bomb, a 12,000-pound earthquake bomb, designed by British genius Barnes Wallis. On July 6, 1944, the Royal Air Force dropped Tallboys on the site. They hit, they penetrated, and they shattered the tunnels. The V-3, Hitler's nightmare cannon, was buried in rubble before it could ever fire a single shot. But the fear it created, that stayed. To this day, and this was just the beginning. Beneath a quiet hillside in northern France, Hitler's most dangerous weapon was coming to life, not in a factory, not in a lab, but carved into the bones of the earth. It was unlike anything the world had seen. Not a rocket, not a missile, but a supercannon so massive it had to be built into the side of a mountain, and if it had fired, the world might have never recovered. The V-3 wasn't just a gun, it was a monstrosity of engineering. Imagine a cannon stretching longer than a football field, powered by a chain reaction of explosions, not one charge, not two, but a series of 30 secondary charges along the barrel, all timed to ignite as the shell passed by. Each side chamber was precisely calibrated to fire milliseconds apart, accelerating the shell faster and faster until it reached over 1,500 meters per second. That's over Mach 4.5, a velocity so extreme, it would be invisible to radar and unstoppable by air defense. The shell itself was over 3 meters long, packed with high explosives, and designed to arc gracefully through the sky like a silent, mechanical reaper. It would travel over 100 miles and land right in the heart of London. No aircraft, no heat signature, no warning. And here's the terrifying part, it was reliable. In early tests, Nazi engineers successfully fired smaller versions of the weapon. The science worked. The weapon was feasible. They just needed time and secrecy. But secrecy came at a cost. The V3 site at Mimoyecques required over 5,000 forced laborers, working under horrific conditions. Many died during excavation. Others were executed to protect the project. Entire villages were cleared. Hills were gutted. Supplies were rerouted from active fronts, all to feed the monster beneath the hill. The Allies, meanwhile, struggled. To understand what the site was, it looked like a bunker or a storage depot, but reconnaissance flights showed strange, deep trenches, tracks that led nowhere, long tunnels that didn't match known facilities. Inside those tunnels were 5 long galleries, angled toward London. Each was a barrel in the making. Each was meant to fire relentlessly, day and night. Hitler believed that by unleashing this weapon, he could bombard London into submission, not destroy the city completely, but break the British will to fight, turn civilians into refugees, cause panic, chaos. The psychological effect would be devastating. Imagine waking up in London, hearing no sirens, no planes, just a massive explosion with no warning, then another, and another, hundreds per hour, a ghostly barrage from an unseen hand. And here's what no one tells you. The V3 wasn't just one gun. It was meant to be a battery, 25 barrels, firing in sequence, a constant stream of high-speed death raining from the French hills. Allies had to act fast. Operation Crossbow, originally focused on the V1 and V2, was expanded. Every piece of intel was reviewed, every photo examined. The question was no longer what is this, but how do we destroy it? But conventional bombing didn't work. The site was buried beneath reinforced concrete and rock. It would take something new, something earth-shaking. The answer came from British engineer Barnes Vollis, the same mind behind the bouncing bomb. His new creation was the Tallboy, a 12,000-pound bomb that didn't just explode. It created a shockwave through the ground. When the RAF finally confirmed the threat, they sent in their best Lancaster bombers, loaded with Tallboys. On July 6, 1944, the skies above Mimoyecques turned black. The Tallboys hit with the force of an earthquake. One breached the concrete, another caused a collapse. The site was crippled. The monster inside the hill was dead. Or so they thought, because part of the weapon survived. And in Chapter 3, we reveal how close it came to firing, and how the secret lived on. Stay locked in. The truth gets darker. The Allies thought it was over. Mimoyecques was bombed. The Tallboys had collapsed tunnels and buried the barrels. The V3 was declared neutralized, forgotten, but they were wrong. In the aftermath of the bombing, Nazi engineers returned to the site. Shockingly, several barrels were still intact. Damaged, yes, but not beyond repair. And deep inside the complex, experimental models of the Supergun remained untouched. The German High Command gave a chilling order. Resume development. The 5-3 may have failed at Mimoyecques, but it would rise elsewhere. Just months later, the Nazis unveiled a modified version of the weapon near the city of Trier, Germany. This smaller-scale V3 was aimed not at London, but at Luxembourg. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, this hidden installation fired over 180 shells at Allied forces. It was a test, a warning, a final attempt to resurrect the Supergun project. The damage was limited, but the message was clear. Hitler's dream was still alive. But by 1945, time was running out. The Allies were advancing, factories were collapsing, supplies were dwindling. And the V3, the great weapon of vengeance, was never fully realized. Yet the story doesn't end there. Because after the war, as Allied forces swept through Germany, they uncovered documents, diagrams, prototype parts, and one chilling phrase repeated across Nazi engineering notes. Greater than Phase 2, the Atlantic Cannon. It was the next step, a V3 designed to fire across the ocean. The goal, New York City. Had the war continued another year, had the Nazis stabilized their territory, they may have attempted the unthinkable to bombard American soil from Europe. Historians today debate whether it would have worked. Some say the Atlantic Cannon was fantasy. Others believe the technology was close. But what no one denies is this. The V3 was real. It was built, it was tested, and it was fired. It failed, not because it couldn't work, but because the Allies stopped it just in time. And the fear it left behind. That's eternal. Today, the ruins of Mimoyecques still remain. Silent, cold, a reminder of what could have been. Tourists walk through the same tunnels where forced laborers died, where engineers once planned death from below, where Hitler believed he held the key to crushing Britain. The V3 was the ultimate what-if weapon, and in a war defined by innovation and terror, it stands alone as the machine that almost rewrote history. Because sometimes, the scariest weapons are the ones that never fire. And now that you've heard the truth, we ask you, what other forgotten superweapons should we uncover next? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this episode shocked you, hit subscribe, because at Warforged, we don't just tell history, we unleash it.